Hi, and welcome to Hull and Hull TV. I'm Dana O'Brien, and I'm joined by founding partner Ian Hull and managing partner Suzana Popovic-Montag at Hull and Hull LLP, an innovative law firm that practices exclusively in estate, trust, and capacity litigation. Here at Hull and Hull TV, we're exploring the issues around estate planning that affect you. Ian and Suzana, two sensational murder cases in Canada, Helmut Buxbaum and Peter Demeter, both of whom arranged to have their wives killed for $1 million insurance policy. Now, these are pretty dramatic illustrations of how criminal law crosses into estate planning. Ian, how clear is the law in preventing convicted killers like Buxbaum and Demeter from inheriting?
Well, I think nothing is ever totally crystal clear in law, but in the area of estates and in certain circumstances where there is a murder involved, the courts have made it clear in Canada that once the individual is found guilty and has exhausted all his or her rights of appeal, then the question of the administration of the estate gets finalized, and only then can you take the view that the asset will not pass to the individual. Now, that's murder, and it can get a little complicated in terms of any other charges and any other findings of guilt, but a clear-cut case of murder, exhausted appeals, you don't take.
So in other findings, for example, Suzana, what other criminal code provisions prevent a spouse or other relative from inheriting?
Well, there is a provision in the Criminal Code section, I believe it's 366, that talks about forgery being a crime. And so if a will has come about as a result of some kind of fraud or forgery, someone's signed it improperly on behalf of the testator, then in that case, they're not going to be entitled to take under the will.
What about cases of spousal abuse, for example, Ian? How clear-cut is the law there?
Well, it isn't. We cannot be very proud in Canada about the law in terms of how one has impacted their estate if there is a finding of spousal abuse. There is some growth in that area in the U.S., where some of the states are starting to look at behavior that's tied to spousal abuse findings. And again, these are really important thresholds, findings, rights of appeal exhausted, those kinds of things. But the measure of the importance of spousal abuse and the measure of the legislatures in some of the U.S. states starting to look at, well, you know what, if you're found guilty of spousal abuse, then maybe you shouldn't inherit from that estate, and certainly as a result of spousal abuse ever causing any death, for sure.
So do you think, Suzana, that they're ahead of us in the U.S. in terms of how they deal with spousal abuse in the courts?
I think they definitely are, because it really surprises me when you hear these kinds of things, and it surprises most people that, you can do elder abuse or you can have domestic violence involved and not be disentitled under an estate. And I think there's a real outrage that comes with that understanding, and that we'll see certainly some steps being taken in the right direction in the next little while.
So you think it's time for our government, our courts to catch up?
Absolutely.
I'm not as optimistic that we will catch up. I'm hoping they'll catch up in terms of analyzing the spousal abuse as being a trigger for treating it almost like the threshold of murder. And there's now at least a framework that's being established in the U.S. because there's lots of room for abuse of that too. But the other area where the U.S. are very innovative, and I think that we might be moving towards too, is that if behavior affects inheritance, not just spousal abuse behavior, but a situation where someone, for example, they have a tort of interference in inheritance. So if someone has unduly influenced their mother to change her will, the remaining siblings on death in the U.S. have a tort, an action against that sibling who improperly abused his mother's frail circumstances to change the will. So there are other layers of claims that are starting to build that will help deter that kind of behavior in the long run. So I'm personally optimistic, but I'm not sure that the legislature is jumping all over it, and the courts may have to be the ones to push that kind of thinking forward.
But at least we can look to the U.S. as good examples of where we ought to go.
Absolutely.
Ian and Suzana, thank you. And thanks for joining us on Hull and Hull TV.